Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Daring to Dad podcast, where we explore the intersections of fatherhood, masculinity, and culture. I'm your host, Ryan Walton. Today's conversation is one of the most important we've ever had on the show. I sit down with Tisheila Justice, a licensed clinical social worker and trauma therapist, and we talk about a topic that doesn't get nearly enough airtime: postpartum mental health in men. We get real about what happens to fathers after birth, how postpartum depression shows up for men, and why supporting both parents matters so deeply for the health of the whole family. Tisheila brings insight, compassion, and clarity to a conversation that I truly believe every parent and everyone who loves a parent needs to hear. So let's get into it. Hello, Tisheila. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Um, we just recently met through Dr. Audra, who was recently on the Daring to Dad podcast, and I'm so glad to have come across your work. I think it is so important, and I know the topics that we're going to get into today are they're heavy and they're packed full of emotion and difficult experiences for people. But I thought we'd maybe set the stage first and just maybe give folks a little idea and a sense of who you are and what you're up to in the world.
Yes. My name is Tisheila Justice. I'm a licensed clinical social worker in Florida, pending in New York. Um, and I traditionally have been like a maternal, perinatal, postpartum clinician for maternal health. Um, but as I was doing that work, I really started to see and notice that we have to support families as a whole, not necessarily just one partner. And postpartum impacts everybody. And what I've found in this work is that it's the most vulnerable time for people's relationships, the most vulnerable time for people individually. And that has long-term impacts on relationships. And I don't know if you know the statistics, but I think it's like 1 in 5 couples separate after a baby.
Hmm.
Um, and that's a really high number. And they start to report experiencing like complications in their relationship at that time. And it makes sense when you know all the data and all the stuff. But I really became passionate in working with both parties as I started to connect with doulas in the area as well as birth centers, and they acknowledged that they have never seen um, men wanting to be so involved in every appointment, in every aspect of the delivery, and they were like, our men want to be involved, and I don't know why that was like the first time it became like reality to me that I was like, oh, we have to change the way we approach postpartum care and perinatal health because it's not just one person, it's both
Yeah.
parties.
Yeah. That's so true. That feels like it's the expectation has shifted. I
Mhm.
mean, it wasn't even until I feel like the 60s, maybe even, that men were even like allowed in the delivery room.
Yes. Isn't that
Like,
crazy?
and because I mean, you're talking about postpartum, but the entire experience. I mean, I know that, my kids are 12 and 7. And so I'm, it's been a little while, but not like that long, where I
Mhm.
remember going to all the classes early on, and it was packed loaded with other men, other dads. I
Yeah.
mean, to your point, like the expectation to being a fully engaged partner is not only, I think, is being called forward in men,
Yeah.
but men desire it. They want to be connected and involved. And so what you're saying about postpartum is so true. Talk a little bit, because I think we have a lot of guys here that are
Mhm.
listening to this, and I always want to make sure that we're defining terms. When you talk about like postpartum and this whole experience, what are we talking about?
So when we're talking about postpartum, we're talking about after birth, there are physiological and chemical changes that take place, not just bringing the baby home. And I think we normally think about the social change and
Mm.
dynamics as far as the baby is home and you're not sleeping and all of those things. But really, we're talking about a physiological, chemical change in both parties that impacts how you guys are regulating and working together. And you mentioned something that I think is really important when you talked about going to those courses beforehand where it was loaded with men and they're with their partners. And my husband came to every single doctor's appointment that I had. He was present for everything that I did, every Bradley method class, everything I
Mm-hmm.
learned about birth. And
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't imagine him not being there because we need each other at that time.
Yeah.
Not only um, because he just is like my comfort person, but I couldn't regulate myself, we're not, yes, I'm physically giving birth, but like I need a grounding person there for me
Yeah.
because I don't know these people and this is
Mm-hmm.
scary and I want to feel
Yeah.
like I'm protected and supported. And you still need that postpartum. So when you bring the baby home, you, for women, we're having all these physiological changes that are estrogen levels dropping, progesterone going all over the place, and that regulates and impacts our anxiety, our depression, our immune health. Like lots of things can happen. And I don't think people think about that for men, similar things are happening. It's been recorded scientifically that men's testosterone drops dramatically. And that serves a purpose because it allows for more oxytocin and it allows for more dopamine so that they can attach to their family at a deeper level. But when we think about attachment, I think we just think about caring about somebody,
Mm-hmm.
but attachment is like a very vulnerable connection.
Yeah.
And so you have to weaken some of your defense
Mm-hmm.
mechanisms that would
Yeah.
probably come from testosterone
Mm-hmm.
so that you can connect at a deeper, more vulnerable level. But when you are more vulnerable in a world that doesn't allow you to be vulnerable, what do you do with that? Especially when your partner, who might have been your only or main emotional support person,
Yeah.
is also going through that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't know a lot of men that gets phone calls, that's like, oh, I had this perfect male therapist postpartum, like for you to talk to, or
Yeah.
how are you doing? Let me screen
Mm-hmm.
you and see how you're
Yeah.
doing. We don't even ask men emotionally how they're doing.
Right. I just remember this sense of, no matter how much you prepare for bringing a baby home, like it all of a sudden happens, and all of a sudden you're in your house with this, you know, human that you're keeping alive, and it feels like it just hits you, no matter how much you prepare and how much you've thought about it,
Yes, we
and
talked about it.
yeah, you've talked about it, and um, you it's incredibly disruptive for everybody, and everyone's trying to figure out this new way of operating and being.
Mhm.
And I know a lot of guys, flip into um a mode of, protect, care, be the rock, be the solid thing that, the person that you love needs. Um but it's also this feeling of you're having to renegotiate your role.
Yes.
Your partner whose um attention, especially maybe if it's your first, right? If it's maybe your first child you bring home, that like the relational dynamic has shifted. Now
Mhm.
like the priority for like your partner is like this baby,
Mhm.
and this person's body is now the baby's, and their
Yes.
heart and their mind is the baby's, and you're like, you almost feel like, oh, I'm on the outside of this a little
What do
bit,
I
and
do?
what do I do? I'm trying to figure out my place, and that takes its toll on us as well. Talk maybe a little bit about that and what you've experienced as you've worked with guys.
I think it's very common because whether we like this or not, the reality is that people do deep down believe that women have an intuition in connecting with the baby and knowing what they're supposed to do
Mhm.
after they have a child. And if we're talking about a new generation of men that really want to be engaged and want to be present and they want to show up, but they've not seen what you're supposed to do here.
Mhm.
They don't know. And we don't direct you. Like I know
Yeah.
like for a lot of women, they're like, I don't know, he should figure it out like I did because everyone's in the weeds. And when you're in the weeds, you're going to really respond to one another with your stress responses.
Yeah.
And anything that you loved about your relationship before, especially with your first, is going to be different because a lot of those coping strategies and the things that made it work before may not be there. Like you don't have the time, you don't have the ability to go de escalate and process. You're
Mhm.
not getting the best sleep. You're not showing up as your best version because there's so much going on, and
Yeah.
it's hard to like process what I'm feeling and what's going on. And a lot of
Hmm.
men can't even articulate, like, I don't know my role here. I don't know what I'm supposed to do.
Hmm.
How can I even be helpful?
Yeah.
And personally, my kids are 11 and we had twins, and my husband, luckily fantastic, involved in everything and was present. And I still remember, I think maybe I was 5 weeks postpartum, and he was only given 2 weeks off because
Hmm.
he didn't give birth, and like, can he ask for more? He doesn't have anything physically going on, and they gave him, typically his job at the time gave 1 week for a baby for a guy, and because we had twins, they gave him 2 weeks, and like that was like a blessing. Like they're like, oh, we'll
Yeah.
give you
Oh,
two,
oh, we'll give you 2 weeks for twins
we'll
instead.
give you
Look how
two,
generous we are.
right? We're so great. And
Yeah.
so at the time, I remember not keeping track of the time or the day or
Hmm.
anything that was happening. Like he would leave for work, and when he came back, I didn't even realize the whole day had gone by. And so I was just kind of lost in a space that he had never seen me in before, because I normally had it together. I could always handle everything that I was doing. So this like really strong, independent person that he married was like in her own world and
Hmm.
wasn't communicating the way I did before. And I still remember maybe 5 weeks postpartum him saying like, I just don't even think you care about me anymore.
Mm. Wow.
And
Yeah.
you would think that as a clinician that I would respond to that in a much more positive way, but I said, because don't. I don't
Yeah.
care about me anymore. I only think about
Oh,
keeping these
wow.
children alive, and that's the
Hmm.
only thing I think of. When you leave for work, I don't eat. I don't think about eating. I never even think about my own like physical needs.
Yeah.
And that was a wake up call for us because we thought we were super prepared. We
Yeah.
went to all the classes, we did all this research. We had been together for 10 years. And so, even the most stable relationships that are working positively have these bumps in the road that you maybe never faced before. And you're trying to figure out, like, what am I even feeling? I've never felt like this before. Like, I just
Yeah.
want to reconnect with my significant other. And this is what I talk to a lot of men about, is they want to reconnect, but they don't know what is the right way to do that, because maybe they were really affectionate before and
Yeah.
she's touched out and doesn't want that. And it's
Yeah.
like, just,
You're
you know,
reconnecting. Well, you want to reconnect, but this is now a different person
this is a different person.
in every way. Like it's and maybe would you say that especially for they might I don't know what the right, if there's a clinical term for the same thing, but kind of like even out, right? Come back to like a sense of what it was before, but there's always going to be a difference. You're having to renegotiate the relationship with uh,
Consistently for a
uh
while.
yeah, for with this new person, and that can be that can shake people up, and
Yeah.
you know especially for with I think guys, and I don't know what you think about this, let me know. But yeah, there's a baby that's coming into the world, and we're parenting together, but the experience is different, right? And
Very.
it's not more, less, better, worse. It's just different, right? And when if you have a partner who's this child has been with them physically for a while, right?
Mhm.
And they've felt this intimate connection with this child inside of them for like a long time, and this process. And when the baby arrives, that's like the first time the guy's actually like feeling it,
Yeah,
seeing it, experiencing it. And it's like you got to catch up really, really quick a
for
little bit
sure.
to the
For sure.
process as well, and make up for what you feel. I know a lot of guys talk about feeling like the B parent. I'm the backup, the sidekick. What
Yeah.
do you
Even if they don't
say?
want to be, even if
Right,
they
right.
want to be
Like,
more
yeah,
involved.
yeah. So what do you say to guys who maybe have that feeling, who are like trying to catch up real quick, but feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm feeling lost. I'm feeling on the outside of it. Um, where does that come from, and how do you help people work through that?
And I feel like that's so common. And it's something that people say to me all the time. And we go back to like the creation of humanity. There are certain pheromones that a pregnant, expecting woman gives off, and that is for the male to start to bond with the unborn child.
Mhm.
But the way our society is set up, we're not spending the amount of time together that we would normally spend together because there's this separation with work and not being present
Mhm.
for it all the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
So the natural attempts for, the neurobiology of attachment is not happening the way that it is supposed to because we're separated a little bit.
Yeah.
But even those first few days, like if the mom traditionally, very frequently, they're like, let's do skin to skin because we know that that helps with the
Mhm.
bonding. But it's very important that guys get to participate in that as well because this does something for your brain just like it does for your baby.
Mhm.
And for dads, it's they're the first person that the child like identifies as a separate being. Like they identify, oh, this is another person because for a long time they feel a part of it's like their mom is them. Like they are one. And so dad's role is to be the first like interaction really
Mhm.
with play and they release different brain chemicals when they're with dad versus mom because everyone is important. Everyone plays a role in the family. And because of the way that we like dismiss the role of men
Mhm.
in parenting, especially those early phases, as if, oh, well, they just want mom. They only need to be with their mom. There's separation anxiety for their mom because
Mhm.
she's the one that carried them and fed them. And that's not true. And we're talking about the best case scenario where there's actually the delivery and nothing went wrong and everything was totally fine and they got to take the baby home. We're not even talking about what happens if that's not the case
Yeah.
and what role you play. Just because it's not your body
Mhm.
doesn't mean you're not experiencing the same things that your partner is experiencing,
Right.
even if it's in totally different ways, and you're given permission to express it less.
Yeah. 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 Because I think, and I probably speak for a lot of guys here. You just kind of lock into this mode of like, I got to be the rock. I got to be, there's no room. Like you just, again, best case scenario, you just witnessed like the miracle of life. Like you just watched like your partner do something like incredible. I will never forget the mother of my children. And I get emotional thinking about it, just like what she did. I mean, and you're witness to that, this absolute miracle. You're like, I'll never complain again about anything, you know. But but you take that on that sense. Oh my gosh, I'm never going to complain about anything again. What they went through, you're watching their body change. You're watching the sacrifice, they're making physically, emotionally, and you put your in some really beautiful ways. You put your own stuff on the back burner to care for someone else, but that you can't just sit in that, right?
No.
When do you begin to bring some of that forward? And I would say this too, where do you bring that, right? Like where can a guy, because
Yeah.
maybe it's not, maybe mom of a baby is not in a space to handle some of that, right?
Right.
Fairly enough. So what can guys do who are like, oh my gosh, I'm feeling a certain way. I have fears and anxieties
Yeah.
and oh my gosh, like where can I put that?
That is like such a fantastic thing that you bring up because I'm just like, we need to create healthier spaces for guys to be able to do this, whether that's because we have like support group or we have professionals that are targeting them and giving them space for that. What I see people do, and this is probably more of a maladaptive coping strategy, but what happens when men start feeling that feeling and they're not knowing what to do with it, they put it in places that they are already confident in. So if they have a job that they feel really confident about, they'll start overworking and like really pouring themselves into those things. Or if they have a hobby, work out, or there's like golf or whatever they feel confident in
Yeah.
already, they're going to go seek more of that because it's the only place they're getting their validation. And
Mm,
this is where one of the signs of postpartum depression for men is overworking, impulsive behavior, substance use and abuse. And that is because, like, there's no space for this. Like, where do I go with this if my entire world just changed and this is not what I predicted would happen? Because nobody thinks this is going to happen to us. Like, we are together and we planned it and we worked this all out and we're of a certain age. But it gets so complicated because this thing that I was excited about, that I really wanted, even if it's not because you think it's like particularly hard, you are developing your identity as a father. And that's not something you necessarily have confidence in when you don't necessarily feel like you even get choices or options.
Yeah.
You feel like you had mentioned earlier, the B parent, the
Mhm.
parent that just is kind of more directed, not the one that makes directives.
Mhm.
And if you feel that way for a long time, a lot of time that leads to withdrawal or avoidance and what it looks like to your partner or to other people because we're very judgy of men.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, it's quick to be like, oh, like he doesn't care. He can't handle fatherhood. And when you are being viewed in that way and feeling like you need to prove yourself about something you're already not confident in. So, like, I want to prove that I'm a good father, but I don't even think that I'm a good father
Yeah.
because I don't even know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And
Nothing shuts a man down quicker than being made to feel incompetent.
yes. And unfortunately, in this area, I feel like society really kind of makes it like you're not the important one. Like they told my husband, like you get a week off. It's not important for you to be off.
Yeah.
It's not important for you to get this time. Like
Yeah.
you're just the dad.
Yeah.
I feel like without saying it in ways, we're basically saying like this isn't your space.
Uh-huh. Yeah, as a society, it's like we're communicating that with our policies, with the marketing that we see, when it comes to, early childhood. It's so true. I want to get back into that, but you said something that I want to dive into. You said men get postpartum depression.
Yes.
Tell me about that.
Yes. And I believe the statistic is 1 in 10 men that have experienced postpartum depression. And the Postpartum International Support Network, they actually have like a campaign. They're really trying to get people to understand. And this is an international program that's trying to bring awareness to postpartum depression because it's common. And one statistic that I saw, and I want to say it was on the National Institute of Health, they had talked about within 6 months of a delivery or a man becoming a father, their risk of anxiety and depression increases to about 1 in 6. And then 1 year postpartum or after they become a father, their risk of depression doubles. And so what that says to me is that, oh, they start off struggling and then we leave them struggling and it gets worse and it's more likely that it gets worse and your risk of postpartum depression increases if your partner experiences postpartum depression as well.
Yeah. How do men get postpartum depression?
And it's a lot to do with the chemical changes that happen postpartum. And ideally, your testosterone is lowering and it's making space for oxytocin and dopamine, which are like those feel good hormones. However, we have several things within our community and within the world that prevents us from having that release. So as you become less confident and you start to withdraw and maybe pull away and work too much and just occupy your time in spaces that you feel more confident, your testosterone is still low and you're not getting those feel good hormones. So it's a really bad combination. And this is just the chemical portion of like what normally would happen. That's not with the impacts of your relationship maybe not being what it was, of not feeling as supported as maybe you felt prior to having a child, because your partner might have been your support person that you went to and you talked to. And what I normally see in my practice is that I might see a woman within like 6 to 8 months giving birth, and they're in my office ready to do some work about postpartum. And that's like the longest. Like some people are there within a couple months.
Hmm.
But if I get a referral for a male, their child's like almost 2.
Mm.
So for years at
Yeah.
that point, they've put in they probably didn't recognize the signs, didn't know what was going on because no one ever talks about it. They don't ever do any assessments for men and say, like, oh, you just brought a baby into the world. Like, let me do this screener for you and see if you have postpartum depression. They don't think to ask those questions.
Right.
Uh, but
Yeah.
so many factors, not just social, but chemical and biologically, that are going to change. And there's no guardrails for you, there's no support for you.
Yeah. I think a lot of people might just be surprised even to hear that men actually even get postpartum like depression.
Yeah.
It's just not something that is talked about a lot, to your point, right? And I know that you have started to talk about this, and it has been met with some resistance. Which can you tell us about that?
Yes. So anytime I post on any of my social platforms, whether it's TikTok or social or Instagram, if I talk about postpartum depression, um, it really comes up when I specify that I'm speaking to men. Um, it's like it's a competition for pain, and I think that we're looking at this in the
Mhm.
wrong way. That like this is not who is hurting the most and who is the most unsupported. Because you mentioned, like, you went to those meetings, you went to those appointments, and they didn't talk to you about postpartum depression.
Mhm.
They didn't ask you how you were doing. So really,
Yeah.
they're looking at you like a comfort animal, for your significant other that's pregnant.
Yeah.
But the reality is, men are also experiencing these changes even at a biological level. And I will get a lot of responses that's like, well, they don't understand what we're going through and it's worse for us. And it's maybe they experience something similar because it's a drastic adjustment, but it's so much worse for us. And no one's saying
Mhm.
that it's not hard for all people because we don't have to compete for pain. But
Mhm.
just the surface level of looking at the changes in your life and adjusting to the drastic changes of, one, I have this pressure to keep a person alive.
Mhm.
This is my
Yeah.
responsibility, which I think is just
Yeah.
enormous in
Mhm.
general.
Yeah.
Not only do I have that responsibility, but even if you're not in even if you're not extremely a traditionally like set up couple, there are financial implications for men and expectations for men who have a family that are not necessarily societally placed on a woman. That that is also overwhelming. So there's this like, I need to take care of my wife and children.
Yeah.
I
All the
have this,
stakes are higher. Yeah.
all the stakes are higher.
Yep.
And this is also like the way I can help because if I
Mhm.
don't know
Yeah.
how to help at home,
Yeah.
this is how I'm
Let me go in and
expected to
do,
help.
yeah, let me go in and do the work. Yeah.
And so that's just like the societal pressures that might internally be there, not even just what happened in your childhood. What role did your dad play? Are you trying to break a cycle? Are you trying to be emotionally vulnerable in a way that your
Mhm.
dad was not?
Yeah.
But like you don't have all the skills to manage that on your own. And then the biological changes. And
Mhm.
so when people say that to me, I'm like, that's not 100% true. There's a lot of hormonal changes that happen in men as well. And it makes everything harder when you feel like, let me negate this experience that you have
Mhm.
because there's no space for your experience and my experience.
Yeah.
And I think that that's like the silent thing that
Mhm.
that is really being said to men, which is the reason that they don't get help for birth trauma. That is the reason they don't get help when there's a miscarriage. That's why they don't speak about how they feel postpartum because silently, without people actually saying it, they've really been saying,
Yeah.
it's not your pain. You were just
Yeah.
witness
Yeah.
to
Suck
it,
it up.
and that's not
Yeah.
the same.
Yeah.
That's not the
Yeah.
same.
Yeah. And yeah. I mean, our experiences and compassion, empathy is not this zero sum game. It's this like, we need each other in this. And a, a healthy mother is a healthy baby. A healthy father is a healthy baby. Like we need to like you're talking about this holistic approach that is so important. Um and I can understand the backlash that you get. And I think yeah, I think the narrative can change for the sake of everybody, for the sake
Yeah. Yeah.
of women, for the sake of men, of birth, of everybody involved, right?
'Cause who wins? Who wins
Right.
out of this competition? Like
Yeah,
no one's
yeah,
winning.
Yeah, no one's winning. Yeah, people are just more suffering and more disconnection, right? And to your point about how many relationships suffer, um, I know that I work with guys who have, young kids or newborns, and the disruption that it's causing, right? The stirring up of all these things that maybe have been dormant. I know that for me in my own life, that having kids makes you confront things that you haven't been
Yes.
confronting, right? Both early on and throughout probably throughout their whole lives. But early on
Throughout their
you
full
get hit with
lives.
you get hit with this, reality very early on. And it does create the center where you're asking questions about your life and who you are and what is important.
Hmm.
And it's almost like the taste of everything changes. Like we talked about this, like your job, all of a sudden the stakes are higher and you
Yeah.
feel more pressure at work. The stakes are higher in your relationship and it adds a new kind of pressure that wasn't there
Yeah.
before. And I think a lot of people are tempted to make changes or
Yeah.
decisions during that time. And I always tell people, just wait. Like, move through this. It's probably not a great time to make those types of like
Yeah.
decisions because everything feels so chaotic. Do you know what I
But I
mean?
recognize why they do, and what that's another sign for
Yeah.
me, risk-taking behaviors. And
Yeah.
it's more to do with an attempt to try to get the relief that they're looking for.
Mhm.
So like,
Mhm.
how can I alleviate this like out of control feeling?
Yeah.
Oh, I know, changing my job or moving or
Mhm.
just something that I can take control of and make happen.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. When I feel incompetent, where do I feel competent? Let me go in and I need to control something. I need to impact something because I don't feel like I can do it here. 100%. That is so true. Um, I want to shift a little bit into something that you brought up a few moments ago. And we've been talking about situations where you're right, people go to hospital, have babies, healthy, can go home and are, struggling with swaddling and sleep and all those kinds of things
Yeah.
too. But it also, I know, doesn't always happen that way. I know that I've had personal experience um, with pregnancy loss and miscarriage in my own life, and that is another um, experience that can be hugely impactful for people. And talking about postpartum, um, men experience pregnancy loss in profound ways. Tell us more about your experience with that.
I actually think in general, the world doesn't like to hear sad stories about birth, right? Like,
Mhm.
we only want to know about your pregnancy when it's going to happen. We only want to know about your delivery when it was fine. And if you tell us that it wasn't fine, we're going to say, at least you survived and so did baby.
Mhm.
But that doesn't change a lot of the emotions surrounding it. But the loss of a pregnancy is devastating. It's, men are involved in it. Like, a lot of times it's only you two know and you're aware of this pregnancy that you have. And there was like, you know, a pregnancy test and all these different things, and to just assume that because it wasn't their body that they don't care and they can move on quicker, because no one comes. I don't know anyone that has gone to a man and said like, oh my god, how were you impacted by the miscarriage? um
Mhm.
because again, the ownership is the person who physically experienced it. And I feel like we know that trauma can be experienced vicariously by like witnessing and being a part of
Mhm.
this. May not have been your body, but this was also your child.
Mhm.
And that's sad. And there's not a lot of places to talk about that with, because a lot of people will be like, it's so common to lose a baby before 12 weeks, and it's miscarriages are common. But I think that's society's way of dismissing something that is so tragic and so sad that it's uncomfortable. So we just feel like that's uncomfortable. We don't want to talk about that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so for men, it's a lot of times what I see in that situation, especially if there was even a birth defect that was made it, maybe they were a little bit further along and there was like a birth defect, or there still had to be a delivery, even though the baby wasn't alive. I see men, most part, like stoic. They are putting on this pretend show, suppressing their emotions so deeply because they feel like the pain is owned by their partner. And I can't take up space here because she's so devastated.
Yeah.
And this physically changed her, and I can see physically what this has done to her. But then, where does that leave your sense of loss and your sadness and grief and like all the things that you feel for your partner, but also for your child? And that powerless feeling, that's like one of the number one things that I
Mhm.
hear about, like just feeling powerless, feeling like there's nothing that they can do. And for a man not being able to protect his family from something so horrible,
Yeah.
that can be really devastating.
Yeah. Yeah. That word powerless is something I really feel um, when looking at that, and something that's so big and out of your control. Um, I remember specifically in this experience. And by the way, if you're listening, I knew that we would probably talk about this subject, and I did talk to my parenting partner, and got her consent to be able to share some of these details of our lives. But I'll I remember the doctor tending to us on the night that we lost a child, that he said, I'm surprised this doesn't happen, more often, and talk about some of the statistics and the
Oh,
miracle of life, right?
right?
And that that brought some comfort, right? And this gentleman was he was kind and aware of the gravity of the situation that we were going through. But I'll never forget that it was this other doctor who came into our room, and it was obvious that she was leaving, like on her she was like about to clock out. She had some of her
Mhm.
gear on her, but she stopped in because she said that she had heard what had happened. And she just sat with us. Like, she just and wept. And she just sat in this room with us and cried for like 10 minutes. And you just realize that there's different kind of healing and healers in the world. There are um like, one doctor attended to like the bodies in the room that night, and then this other doctor who didn't need to stop by but did. And I will never forget this woman, like, who did that. And I that was really important for me in that moment. But to your point, I think it's really powerful that we all allow ourselves to feel these moments of loss. And perhaps with guys, I don't know, in with your experience, and I'm so glad there are people like you, because perhaps in these moments your partner isn't the place to go to unload
Mhm.
in that moment, and maybe within a certain window um when it's so fresh and the experience is so raw. I think this goes back to like why it's so important for guys to seek help, community, communities of maybe other men, or someone like yourself who is in the business of like helping people and holding space for people to bring their experiences and pain, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what you just said is so powerful, and I'm so grateful that you guys agreed to share your story.
Yeah.
But what I think society believes is supportive is fixing the problem. And sometimes when you can't fix the problem, you want to dismiss the problem. But what you just highlighted is that people like me and helping professionals in this field, we can't fix things, but we can be with you. We can
Mhm.
sit with you.
Yeah.
And even just having that extra person, even though you had each other, having that other person regulate the room and
Mhm.
give you support, maybe not even saying the words, but just feeling the validation that
Mhm.
this is awful and I am taking this space with
Yeah.
you so that you feel supported. That's a big deal. And I do think it's important that we like continue that belief that like you don't have to fix people's problems. You just have to make sure they're not alone in them.
Hmm.
Even when they have a partner, they
Yeah.
still could feel very alone
Hmm.
because they're hurt too, so they're not
Yeah.
fully present. And we know when you have grief, you're not your full self. You're not when you're in crisis, you're like out of body sometimes.
Hmm. Yeah. It almost feels like what you're saying, and you're talking about this sense of community that we as people for a long time, you know, when someone had a baby, there was this kind of communal experience, maybe especially with like the women, right? And mothers and families and grandmothers, like the women kind of came together, and they were the people who like had the babies, right? And there
Yeah.
was this community, and there was a sense you learned about motherhood, like, from maybe your mother or grandmother, your aunts and uncles, or the other like women of the village, tribe, community, like whatever, right? And we've probably lost some of that, like
Yeah.
over time. And I think about how now you started talking about how there's this now expectation for men to be like right there alongside
Mhm.
partners as they have babies. But there's definitely not, like, maybe we need to be cultivating more of that, like, community, like men's communities
Yes,
for imparting support, wisdom, like that you can't do this isolated.
for sure. And I love that you bring that up too, because when I think about the communal aspect to like having children,
Hmm.
before, yes, women had that, but men weren't alone. They weren't just like alone in their cave by themselves. They would go out with
Hmm.
the other men when they reached manhood and like
Hmm.
they were being taught how to care for
Yeah,
their family, how to do all those things. And we don't create that same space and
yeah.
you don't have that same thing. And every few and far between, there are some men who have like friends that they can call and there's people that they can ask things to, but there's a difference between being able to meet with one person and feeling like you have a community of people.
Yeah.
We are not alone. So that pressure that we talked about earlier
Yeah.
feels a lot less when you have a community behind you
Hmm.
versus I'm just trying to figure this out on my own. And when I face people, I'm just going to pretend like I'm okay because I want them to think I have myself together because I'm supposed to have myself together.
Hmm.
And, this whole like dialogue we have with ourselves can be
Yeah.
broken up if we felt like I can be with this person that I barely know in
Hmm.
this space and just be supported and I can grieve openly and I can process what I'm feeling and it's completely okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to move into the end of our time talking maybe about some just some practical things about ways that maybe two things, ways that men and what skills are helpful for men to cultivate to navigate life postpartum. Like what are some of the skills that you have found that because for me, when I work with dads, I do talk about the pre-work, right? The
Yeah. Yeah.
pre-communication, like the planned, like talking about the things that you're you know um maybe not thinking about, and like have you communicated, like what are the expectations and all those kind of things. So but what are some of the skills for men? And then I want to talk about care and maybe how we as a society, and your thoughts on how we can better care, like for men postpartum. Let's talk about men's particular. What skills do you think are really important for guys to develop for life postpartum?
What I have definitely seen is I feel like getting comfortable with some uncomfortable emotions is very important. And so, like you talked about the pre work, and I feel like so much buildup is to the birth of the child, right? It's always like preparing for the birth, but we have to prepare for our changes. And I don't think the world does that. And so, I do a lot of like postpartum intensive couples work so that they can learn empathetic, assertive responses, which is like a way of expressing understanding of what the person needs and then asking for what you need as well. And so I think it's just a good way of communication and then maintaining connection in various ways, whether that's just at the end of the day saying like your peak and your valley of the day of like that way I know that my partner specifically is struggling with mealtime and that is a or bath time or whatever because you want to kind of know what's on their mind I do think in advance, I have talked to people about negotiating their roles and what their strengths are and what they feel like they can contribute,
Hmm.
because some of the stuff needs to be divided up, and a lot of times we don't think about strength, we think about necessity. And so
Yeah.
it's like, oh my gosh, like, this just needs to get done, so I'm gonna do this. But really, you know, when you sit down and negotiate with your partner, I'm like, oh, I don't have a problem doing laundry. Like, I don't care about, you know,
Hmm.
getting up and doing the bath time. And that's like a relief when your partner says they want to do something that you feel like is overwhelming.
Yeah.
Uh, but I also think it's important for organizations to allow support and space for men. And I think one of the number one things they need to have is actual support groups for men that are postpartum and dads just in general. And I don't mean like donuts for dads at school. I mean, we need to have a space where guys are doing activities out
Yeah.
together. And so, and things that they're doing with their partners as well. So even I've teamed up with the local doula program, and they're allowing us to use space to create a free support group for both partners. And we want to be able to grow this into a community. The point of it is community, not for us to
Mm.
necessarily make money, but to cultivate a community feeling where people can get to know each other. We can have events, we can do different activities, and people can break off and organically create those relationships.
Hmm.
And we can give them several opportunities to do that, so that like all those parenting groups that you went to would be great if like some of those connections remained. And
Hmm.
oh, you were in my like birth class or whatever. And so your kids around the same age. Like, what do you have going on? And just organically develop those relationships. Um, and as a society, we have to allow everyone to have emotional responses to things.
Hmm.
And knowing that just because you feel this way right now doesn't mean you're going to feel this way forever. But I think we are so uncomfortable with certain emotions, especially from people that we need and want to believe are strong and fine, that we reject them expressing it. And I think that we have to undo that, because the system we have right now doesn't work for
Hmm.
families. And I feel
Yeah.
like we are creating a pressure cooker for families,
Yeah.
for men.
Yeah.
There,
Yeah.
I definitely see a lot of people that are, you know, disconnected, growing increasingly disconnected, not building their confidence because they don't feel like they have a role. And so it's important to have those ongoing conversations, to have support people.
Hmm.
If I think men should even reach out to maternal mental health clinicians that are like listed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and that way they can have somebody that understands. And I'm not saying that it has to be a female. There are males that do this work as well. And that there's stuff that like you and other men that I see on social media, like they have platforms catered to this. So
Hmm.
there's podcasts, there's all sorts of things, but I really think the organic, actually physically connecting with other men that are going through some of the same
Yeah.
experiences is really important.
Oh, it's so huge. Yeah, isolation is a killer for so many guys in general, but I think especially during these vulnerable times.
Yeah.
Um, but to your point, as a society, like caring for parents, for families, it feels like it gets a lot of lip service, but when it really
Mhm.
comes down to it, from a policy standpoint, both like from governments, but also like private companies, like
Yes.
there's a, you we know the statistics around kids, growing up in homes without fathers, and keeping men healthy, like postpartum, is important. And we have to do that as a community because it can't come from,
Mhm.
always from the partner who just had a child, right? Like, I think when you're isolated as a couple, and left to kind of, you're gonna have to support each other, like, no doubt. But when there's
Mhm.
so much pressure, like, in that, and there's not enough maybe support from the outside, and I say that too, recognizing that not everyone has
Mhm.
like the means or the situation where they have like, oh, grandparents and aunties and
Yeah.
uncles and all this kind of stuff around. Kind of like not everyone's in that situation,
Yeah.
and It's easier said than done, but I think collectively, supporting men more through postpartum is a worthy cause, and I'm so glad you're out doing this.
Yes, and I'm so glad you have this podcast and you're like really getting into mental health because I know that there's a lot of pushback and a lack of
Mhm,
compassion for men
mhm. Yeah,
um,
yeah,
that have their own mental health concerns and just things that they're struggling with, and we don't allow a lot of space for that. And instead,
yeah,
we like fight. Like
yeah,
women have
yeah,
ownership of this emotional space, and that's
yeah.
what does
Well,
that do
at the end of the
now?
day, I think the success of women is the success of men. The success of men
Yeah.
is success of, and our thriving is connected. That for
Yes,
you to succeed, like I deeply want you to succeed in life, right? And for all of us to look for that in one another, to want the best for all people,
yes,
like we can do that, and there's enough, like of that, it's maybe it's just that perspective of looking at things through abundance and not scarcity that we all
for sure.
have, yeah, that, yeah, our, thriving is codependent, and that's a beautiful thing.
And I actually think that we always were wired that way. We just
Hmm.
got into this individualistic, you know, place and
Yeah,
think. But we are connected. Like
yeah,
there's all sorts of chemical things that happen when you walk into a room with other people that
yeah,
can change things. And like
yeah.
your heart syncs up to other people's heart rate
Hmm.
and your breath pace syncs up. And that's called coherence. And there's a global
Hmm.
coherence. I can
Yeah.
get into the weeds and very boring about that stuff, but it's fascinating because we're so deeply connected, but we're so isolated. And that
Mhm.
is so hard when you are expanding your family and like you said, you are kind of busted open and things that you thought were healed maybe start to show their face and rear their head throughout your fatherhood journey. And you're probably trying to figure yourself out and like, wait, what is happening? Like, I haven't felt
Yeah.
this way since I was like 6 years old or
Hmm.
whatever. And so
Yeah.
there's all sorts of personal growth, but there's also like a depth and need for connection.
Yeah. Uh, Tisheila, how can people connect with what you're doing in the world? Tell us about where you're at, what you're up to.
Yes, so I am on Instagram as Growth and Wellness. I also have a website, growthandwellness.com. I am going to be, I already have some in-person like support groups for parents in general, but I am going to expand that to virtual just because I do feel like cultivating a community just in general and even just how social media has benefited my life and helped me grow as a person and helped me feel more supported. I want to make sure that I continue to do that. So even if we have to do it virtually or
Hmm.
if I can do pop-ups in different areas, that's something that I definitely want to grow. I'm also on TikTok as Tisheila Justice, um, trauma therapist. So if you want to reach out, you can shoot me a message on my website and links. And, I'm hopeful to get a lot of options available and resources and just things to help you connect with your partner, but also just to grow personally after bringing a child into the world.
Beautiful thing. Thanks for what you do. Thanks for carving the time out to be with us here on the podcast. And yeah, I'll continue to follow your work. If you're listening and you've made it this far in through the conversation, please give Sheila a follow, a shout out, and a comment on this podcast. Would love that. So, Sheila, thank you so much for being
Thank
here
you so
today.
much.
All right. Hey, thanks so much for watching, for listening. If you enjoyed it, one way you can support my work is by subscribing, by sharing, all of those things. Thanks so much. I'm incredibly grateful for your support.